And this issue was even better because the X-Men are called to Xavier, and I guess they're across town in their uniforms, and they start rushing towards the mansion. Now they get distracted by Angel, who gets jumped on by a bunch of girls for some reason. So I guess, again, the mutant hatred not exactly going here, and Jean seems to be jealous, and she gets rid of all the girls. Says, "How about a movie?" And she teleports them all, moves them. Oh, I forgot about to mention that in the first issue, she calls her telekinesis teleporting.
Oh, really? I never
Yeah,
noticed
she
that.
goes, "My power to teleport." No, love,
I
telekinesis.
wonder if that was just like a typo.
I think that's just Stanley not knowing what he's
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
So she moves them on to the cinema, which was pretty funny stuff. And then they're on the way, and Iceman and Cyclops just happen to come across this accident, and they save these guys, and they're like, "Oh, thank you so much." They finally get to Xavier, and then this was the wackiest. Well, there's a lot, but this was one of the wackiest scenes I've ever probably seen in comics. Xavier does like a cinema screen on the wall with his psychic thoughts, explaining with all the dialogue and everything, showing them all the Vanisher. And yes, folks, as we discussed when we opened, this was the Vanisher that has become the mutant Vanisher who just died last year in Second Coming. How he gets from this to that, and dear Lord, his costume.
Oh. There's words just can't describe it.
Yeah,
Especially,
I think we should be thankful that Magneto's costume wasn't like this giant magnet on his head, like one of those U magnets. I'm pretty sure that we probably might have got that, but yeah, he looked like a flower, it seemed. And he says, "Oh, we're going to stop him." And then at one point, Iceman just starts shooting snowballs for no particular reason, and they all start dodging it, and they stop him. And then Xavier says, "Stop this right now! Go and fight Vanisher." But first, the Danger Room. So the introduction of the Danger Room, they do all this training, complete with Xavier doing the medical examinations. And then they finally get there on a modified plane, not yet the Blackbird, some sort of modified helicopter plane thing.
Yeah.
But
And it's controlled by Xavier. He says he controls it like telekinetically in the first issue.
But Xavier doesn't have telekinetic. Okay.
Whatever. He said that Xavier somehow, controlling the plane and making it go like where he wants it to go. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. One of those things you'd have to write off that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I know.
Speaking of not making any sense, the villain's plot here. Okay, so Vanisher walks up to the police and says, "Hey, I am the Vanisher, and I am going to go and rob this bank." And the police are like, "Yeah, sure you are." So he walks into the bank, goes and sure enough, goes and robs the bank. And as soon as he's counting the money, the police then decide they're going to do something about this guy. They go in, he teleports, but then later goes to this arm, like he goes to a military base where they've got plans to to apparently some sort of kinetical plans, some defense plans. He goes in and he says to them, "I'm going to steal these plans tomorrow. Or soon," or whatever he said. He's like, "Why don't you just steal them now?" And so he disappears, and they go, "Well, he's so confident he didn't even want to take them now." That was funny stuff. So he eventually gets them, and sure enough, I was thinking, well, why don't they just move the plans then if he's just told them he's going to get them? No, they put 5 armed guards around the plans. He teleports in the middle of them, takes them. Bunch of other stuff. X-Men fight him. He gets away. They get to the White House. Eventually, they defeat him. And again, the X-Men are praised, it seems, which is completely different. So I'll hand it over to you guys. Your thoughts on the second issue?
It was hilarity again. I mean, and also the fact that we actually saw Professor X actually in a combat situation too. Because normally he always used to stay behind the scenes, but this time he goes up to the front and then he uses his powers to effectively mind wipe the Vanisher to forget who he is. And that's something he really doesn't do, or he chooses not to do nowadays.
Or if he does it in secret.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. He
like
has
here, he's just like, mind wipe you. You never saw anything. Jesus Christ. Where's you got anything on this second issue?
I think you guys pretty much covered my thoughts on it. It's a corny issue, but I mean, some of this stuff I kind of have to let slide because, again, they're still working out the characters and stuff. So I mean, it's no excuse, but still, none of the comics were, super great. So
No.
It's funny now, but
they were written as cheap children's entertainment.
Yeah.
They were never gone.
It's like you can almost see in every single time there's the X-Men when they're in the training sequences and stuff. It's all it is just designed to show you this is who the character is, this is what their abilities are, this is what their personalities are, type thing. They're using that kind of way to tell their story versus more modern ways of doing it where they don't go through like really corny training situations.
What I found funny is the hint here was that the romance was going to be between Angel and Jean, not between Cyclops and Jean, which is interesting. And also, Cyclops is kind of a background character here. He does stuff, but he's not a character.
Well, there was like one arc originally. It did look like it was going to be Angel and Jean Grey, but if you remember, there's that one part where Jean Grey was holding up that gigantic ball.
Oh yeah, the Indiana Jones ball.
Yeah, and then that's when, she's like, that's when Cyclops goes up to her and then shoots the ball away with his eye beams, and then he picks her up and holds her, and he's like, Jean Grey's like, "Oh, Cyclops, what would I have done without you?"
Oh, okay.
And then that's when you had Iceman take the that ice horse, and then out of jealousy rams the two of them. So I mean that it kind of like that was the other thing that they're trying to do, maybe to say it was either going to be Angel or Cyclops, but they weren't quite sure where to go.
Well, that actually goes out later. I mean, I've read ahead and stuff like that. I know where all this goes, and it goes into a whole love triangle between these two.
I have a question. Is Iceman the youngest at all then? Because
yeah,
he's
the youngest, and apparently that means he just fires snowballs for no particular reason in the middle of a meeting.
Well, I remember during his training at the beginning, he did. Everybody's doing other feats, but then he chose to be turn himself into an actual snowman.
Yes, that was yeah. He's like, "Look at me, everybody!" Okay. Well, anyway, so the rest of the 60s was pretty much, I gave these guys these issues to get a taste of the era, and this is pretty much what it was. It was silly Silver Age. What's interesting is, in all the books, like Spider-Man and stuff, they were getting more serious, whereas here, things were kind of light-hearted and silly, and there was no real downer until later on, where the Sentinels come along, and then that's when the whole sort of humankind, but even then, it's very sort of loosely done. That was the only one for 1963. 1964, we get the introduction of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Not exactly being suspicious about what they are there. The original Brotherhood of Mutants included Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, Blob. Now, what's interesting is there's an issue with Blob where they meet him and they pretty much kidnap him. And so... and they pretty much say to him, we want you to join the X-Men or we're going to wipe your mind. So, yeah, he runs off and joins the Brotherhood, no wonder. Jason Wygard, Mastermind, is part of this, and also Toad. As the original ones of the Brotherhood of Mutants, they obviously have a battle and stuff like that, and I'm not sure until later on whether it's revealed whether Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are Magneto's kids. I'm not sure whether that's revealed here. Certainly not in the early issues. Other villains we get are Eunice the Untouchable, which, yeah. Namor the Submariner briefly joins the X-Men, which is interesting that was going on all the way back then, and that's kind of a new thing that he's joined the X-Men actually now. And at one point, Mimic joined the X-Men, who was a villain for a while, and he was basically a guy who can mimic everybody's powers, an idea that would be done better, and he actually turned back up during the Dark X-Men thing. Of course, again, the introduction to Savage Land, Kazar and all that, and Dr. Bolivar Trask, who... Now, it's interesting, he's become this infamous X-villain because he's been adapted and he's been in other stuff and whatever else. But he literally turns up in for like a half an issue. He does some... he's in the background doing a bunch of sentiments on how mutants are the end of humanity, and they show this paper with this, like, mutant whipping people. It's like this cartoon. And then he creates the Sentinels, and he introduces the Sentinels, and within about 5 panels, the Sentinels have turned on him. In the same, pretty much, scene. It's like, wow, that didn't go very well. Pretty much from the moment he turns them on, they turn against him, they go and they fight Master Mold and all that kind of stuff. Later on, we get the Magneto would turn back up with a different helmet and a different look. And it would turn out later on this was in fact a robot. One hell of a sophisticated robot, because as we got into the later era here, we got into the introduction of Polaris, Lorna Dane, who was believed to be his daughter. And it's actually disproved by paperwork. I don't think it's DNA when he brings in like a birth certificate and says, no, look, she's not your daughter, Magneto, when she has the exact powers. And now, of course, they reverse that. Now she actually is his daughter, which makes far more sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
But, and also we get the introduction of Alex Summers later on. This is when it gets a little more serious. I mean, after Stan Lee and Jack Kirby leave the books, it's not really been that successful. Then later on, Neil Adams basically wanted to work on the least successful book just to kind of boost up sales. And with him and Len Wein, I believe, who was doing the writing, and it got a lot more towards the X-Men that we actually know. And this was the X-Men that captured, the interests of guys like Chris Claremont and things like that. And this would be obviously Alex Summers, the whole thing with him and Scott and the backstory. Not the stuff with all the aliens and that yet, but just the plane crash and all that. And he'd be introduced as Havoc during that whole thing. And we'd also get Cole Lycos as Sauron, who we'd see again later on. Pretty much that's it. Oh, we also get Sunfire and Banshee, two people who would actually turn up as teammates in the next run of X-Men, who were villains here. Well, Sunfire never really joins them, but Banshee does. And interesting about Banshee is he looks completely different. I don't think he's even Irish or anything. He actually looks like his namesake. He actually looks like a whole ghoulish sort of appearance during these issues. But yeah, it certainly gets more serious as it goes along. But for the most part, this is pretty wacky stuff for the most part. And probably one of the most weird parts, we talked about the sexual harassment thing going on early on. Pretty much later on, it turned into everybody's in love with Jean Grey, including Professor X.
Right.
Yeah.
So he actually proclaims his love for her. Later on, Cyclops and Angel actually outright say so, and they start, fighting for her love. And at one point, Cyclops actually shoots Angel out of the sky with his optic beams over the whole thing. And of course, we know that it ended up with Cyclops winning the day on that. When Lorna was introduced, she was introduced as Bobby Drake's girlfriend, but by the time we get into All New, All Different, she's pretty much said screw you, and she's gone with Havoc, which would be the man she'd stay with pretty much until he told her to bugger off at the altar, which we'll get into in a much later series. So I've been talking a lot here, just facts and stuff, just rambling on. So I'll go to each of you. Joe, what do you want to say about X-Men in the 60s?
It's nothing what I remember it to be, and it's actually a lot more entertaining in the sense that I can see all the humor, probably unintentional humor, and it's actually, I can appreciate the story a little bit more now in that I see where everybody is, and now I'm rereading where they came from, type thing. And it's kind of interesting to see how the Summers brothers are the ones who are always scoring the girls.
Yeah.
Nobody else can get them.
And they're pretty much monogamous. I mean, apart from later on, where of course Scott would, that's due to death and all that, but
right.
Yeah. So, anything else about it for you?
No, it's good fun reading.
Yeah,
it's hard to read sometimes.
Yeah, it's silly fun. There's not as much to talk about with the 60s as there will be later on, because it's not as deep material. It's not stuff that it's not the X-Men as we absolutely love them. I read this stuff after I read the Claremont stuff, so it was kind of like going back and being like, oh my god, what is this? But it's kind of like watching or playing the original Resident Evil game. It's kind of like that. It's on that level. It's so bad it's good. But back then, comics were a different thing. They were for kids, and whether these were wrote on drugs or whether they were wrote to be serious at the time, we'll never know. Wes, what about you? What do you want to say about the X-Men in the 60s?
I liked reading the comics because they're, like you guys said, they're very fun to read, and kind of in an unintentional way.
Yeah.
I can kind of see how, like, the origins of the characters, because for those of you who, don't know, Iceman is my favorite character in X-Men, and he's
not really that deep of a character in this book.